Hello and good afternoon to the esteemed speaker for the plenary session 4, Dr. Mohammed Behnassi, Professor of International Law and Politics of Environment and Human Security, Ibn Zohr University at Adgir, Morocco. Dr. Mayuri H. Pandya, Director, Faculty of Law, GLS University, in her absentia, to all the participants and the viewers who have joined us on the live streaming of the plenary session 4 of the virtual international conference on climate change, governance, and law. This plenary session focuses on the topic climate resilient pathways, adaptation, mitigation, and sustainable development. I would like to welcome Sir for the session for today's session. But before I do so, I would like to call upon Payal ma'am to have the opening remarks. So Payal ma'am, over to you for the opening remarks for the plenary session 4.
Thank you, Dr. Ridita Parikh. As we have this international virtual conference is for 2 days. This is the second day of our conference that is on climate change, governance, and law. Yesterday, also, we had many paper presentations for 7 different themes on which they did it. Of course, all the themes were related to the subject theme line, that is climate change, governance, and law. And we are so glad and happy to announce that from more than 15 countries, various research scholars, participants, and people, academicians, they joined and they presented the papers. They uh, viewed the virtual inaugural ceremony of the function, and two couple of plenary sessions which took place yesterday, and plenary session 3 which was just completed before a couple of minutes, that was also viewed by many of the viewers, and questions and queries were asked, but because of limitation of time we had to conclude by taking few questions only. And we had many discussions about the role of judiciary, the role of us, the role of different countries, and what are the impacts on human rights, and what are the various other issues. Everything was discussed in this couple of days till now. And now we are having the topic on which the discussion will start, and the views will be shared by our today's esteemed guest. As the topic itself says, that climate resilient pathways, adaptation, mitigation, and sustainable development. It is, I feel, that very complex subject to address in few minutes, in which our esteemed guest would be addressing us and would be enlightening us about the views and about the possible pathways to be followed by all of us as in unity to resolve or to come across the problem of climate change. Over to you, Dr. Ridita Parikh.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Yes, I would now like to formally introduce our speaker for plenary session 4, Professor Mohammed Benazir. Sir is a senior environmental expert at the Economic, Social and Environmental Council, Rabat, Morocco. He holds a PhD in international environmental law and governance. He is an expert reviewer of the first order draft of the synthesis report of the IPCC Sixth Assessment Report in Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. In the year 2022, Sir was selected by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services as a review editor of the Nexus assessment of the interlinkages among biodiversity, water, food, and health. Sir is awarded the North-South Prize of the Council of Europe as the lead author of the Human Security Chapter in Climate and Environmental Change in the Mediterranean Basin, Current Situation, and the Risk for the Future. Sir has penned various books, chapters, and has been invited to various conferences and peer reviewed conferences as an eminent speaker. So, sir, over to you, and we are all yours to listen to you as you express your thoughts on the topic resilient pathways, adaptation, mitigation, and sustainable development. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. It is really a great honor and joy to be a part of this conference that is dealing with a very hot topic, which is relevant worldwide. As you know, the world is facing now many crises occurring simultaneously around the world. And this crisis is increasingly calling for innovative approaches to provide innovative responses within the perspective of ensuring global human security, in the perspective of ensuring the resilience of social ecological systems everywhere, and it's also with the perspective of ensuring sustainability and stability of population, of livelihoods, and every support to vulnerable populations worldwide. If these challenges are shared among the humanity, we should recall that uh, the impact of current crisis on developing countries in the global south, and especially vulnerable populations in this global south, are severe, are disruptive, and they can be the consequences can be new factors for instability, for conflict, for mass displacements, and in some scenarios, factors for collective insecurity and the lack of peace. So, in my presentation, uh, I will address climate resilience pathways that are able to address the different crises in some kind of uh, efficiency and in convergent way. Even if we are speaking about climate change, but climate change is uh, a factor which is amplifying other risks. So in most cases, we are speaking about climate change, but we are also speaking about related risks that can have some similar impact. So, among the pathways that are suggested by international law, by multilateral negotiations, and also by science, and also by civil society actors, we can find adaptation, mitigation, and sustainability or sustainable development. Identifying and discussing climate resilient pathways, in my opinion, can be identical to posing the question of what to do to address climate change and threats to development now in and in the future. According to the Article 2 of the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, climate resilient pathways are development trajectories of combined mitigation and adaptation to realize the goal of sustainable development that help avoid dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. They are seen as iterative, continually evolving processes for managing change within complex social ecological systems, taking necessary steps to reduce vulnerabilities to climate change impact in the context of development needs and resources, building capacity to increase the options available for vulnerability reduction and coping with unexpected threats, monitoring the effectiveness of vulnerability reduction efforts, and revising the risk reduction responses on the basis of continuous learning. As such, climate resilient pathways include two main categories of responses. The first category consists of actions to reduce human induced climate change and its impact, and this include both mitigation and adaptation toward achieving sustainable development. And the second category consists of actions to ensure that effective institutions, strategies, and choices for risk management will be identified, implemented, and sustained as an integrated part of achieving sustainable development. In many cases, each of these two categories of responses has the potential to benefit the other as well, offering potentials for win win kinds of integration, although mechanisms and institutions are needed to address some cases where the two categories have negative effects on each other and to ensure that positive synergies are realized. And because climate change challenges are significant for many areas, systems, and populations, climate resilient pathways will generally require transformation. Of course, transformation is beyond incremental approaches, and this transformation is needed in order to ensure sustainability. Incremental responses to climate change often address immediate and anticipated threats based on current practices, management approaches, or technical strategies. And this may involve developing energy efficient vehicles, for instance, to mitigate climate change, or building higher dikes to adapt to sea level rise. However, incremental responses are often referred to as business as usual approaches, as they don't challenge or disrupt existing systems. For transformative responses, in contrast, they involve innovations that contribute to systemic changes by challenging some of the assumptions that underlie business as usual approaches. For instance, transformational adaptations change the nature, composition, or location of threatened systems. Importantly, the transformation of the systems, structures, relations, and behaviors that contribute to climate change and social vulnerability may also be necessary to reduce risks to sustainable development. In conventional thinking, climate change can be perceived as a threat to sustainable development. Therefore, transformational changes are very likely to be required for climate resilient pathways. Uh, there are a variety of complex issues in assessing climate resilient pathways in a variety of scales. In this presentation, sustainable development is perceived as the ultimate aim or goal, mitigation as the way to keep climate change impact moderate rather than extreme, adaptation as a response strategy to keep climate change impact moderate rather than extreme or to cope with impacts that cannot or are not avoided, and developed pathways as context that shape choices and actions. In all cases, I stress here the needs and opportunities to make progress toward climate resilient pathways now rather than postponing responses to an undefined future. And this is what we call climate urgency or emergency. In this regard, the options to be considered for decision making, both now and in the future, as elements for the evolving processes for a variety of locations and scales, can be presented as follows. First, climate change poses a moderate threat to current sustainable development, but a severe threat to future sustainable development. In fact, some climate related impacts on development are already being observed. For instance, the changes in agriculture in many parts of the world are already happening, and also increases in coastal vulnerability is experienced by many countries now. Added to other stresses such as poverty, inequality, or diseases, the effect of climate change will make sustainable development objectives such as food and livelihood security, poverty reduction, health, and access to clean water more difficult to achieve for many locations, systems, and affected populations. Second, climate resilient pathways include strategies, choices, and actions that reduce climate change and its impact. They also include actions to ensure that effective risk management and adaptation can be implemented and sustained. Here, adaptation and mitigation have the potential to both contribute to and impede sustainable development. And sustainable development strategies and choices have the potential to both contribute to and impede climate change in responses. So you see, it's in two ways. Adaptation and mitigation are needed, working together to reduce risks of disruptions from climate change. These actions, however, may introduce trade offs between adaptation and mitigation and between economic goals and environmental goals. In some cases, for example, adaptation might increase greenhouse gas emissions, for example, increased fossil based air conditioning in response to higher temperatures, and this is the case in many parts of the world now. And in some cases, mitigation may impede adaptation, for instance, reduced energy availability in countries with growing population needs. In many cases, strategies for climate change responses and strategies for sustainable development are highly interactive. Third, the integration of adaptation and mitigation responses can, in some cases, generate mutual benefits as well as introduce co-benefits with development policies. Here, in many cases, reducing the risk of climate change can enhance capacities for management of other risks and opportunities to take advantage of positive synergies might decrease with time, particularly particularly if the limits of sorry, particularly if the limits of climate change adaptation are exceeded. Fourth, for climate resilient pathways or prospects for climate resilient pathways are related fundamentally to what the world accomplishes with climate change mitigation, but both mitigation and adaptation are essential for climate change risk management at all scales. That means making the choice between mitigation and adaptation in most cases is not anymore an adequate response. Here, as the magnitude of climate change increases and the consequences become increasingly significant to many areas, systems, and populations, the challenges to sustainable development increase. And beyond some magnitudes and rates of climate change, the impact on most systems would be great enough that sustainable development may no longer be possible for many systems and locations. At the local scale, governments, businesses, communities, and individuals in many developing regions have limited capacities to mitigate climate change because they contribute very little to global emissions. They may also have relatively limited capacities to adapt for reasons of income, education, health, security, political power, or access to technology. At all scales, however, mitigation and adaptation actions are fundamental for effective implementation of climate risk management and reduction. The fifth aspect to promote sustainable development within the context of climate change, climate resilient pathways may involve significant transformation. And transformation here in economic, social, technological, and political decisions and actions can enable climate resilient pathways. And although transformations may be reactive, forced, or induced by random factors, they may also be deliberately created through social and political processes, whether in relation to mitigation, adaptation, or sustainable development. It is possible to identify enabling conditions that support transformation. Nonetheless, there are legitimate concerns about the equity and ethical dimensions of transformation that should be observed during the process. Another aspect, strategies and actions can be pursued now that will move toward climate resilient pathways, while at the same time helping to improve livelihoods, social and economic well being, and responsible environment management. In fact, transformations to sustainability may benefit from iterative learning, deliberative processes, and innovation. Another aspect is related to delayed action in the present that may reduce options for climate resilient pathways in the future. That means the cost of inaction. In some parts of the world, current failures to address the effects of emerging climate stressors are already eroding the basis of sustainable development and offsetting previous gains. Opportunities to design and implement solutions that promote climate resilient pathways exist now, fortunately, and they can capture development's core benefits of improving livelihoods and social and economic well being. And current actions will emphasize climate risk management strategies that are informed by growing evidence, knowledge, and experience. The last aspect of my presentation is that more research about the relationship between mitigation, adaptation, and sustainable development is needed, as well as research on the relationship between incremental changes and more significant transformations for sustainable development. In fact, priorities for research should include improving understanding of benefits, costs, synergies, trade offs, and limitations of major mitigation and adaptation options, along with implications for equitable development to facilitate decision making about climate resilient pathways. As a conclusion, I think that the world is facing many kind of crises now, and fortunately, we have the potential to provide transformative solutions to this crisis if the political will at all scales is available, and if we are more courageous enough to question the business as usual approaches and systems, including liberalism, capitalism, and the predominance of business power over the power of society. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure.
If you allow, we will be having couple of questions to be asked to you.
Yes, please.
Hiral ma'am or Udita ma'am, whoever has got the questions, you may ask with that. You may continue with that. Hiral ma'am was talking about couple of questions. Hiral ma'am, you may also ask, or Udita ma'am, if you have, you may proceed further with the same.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Sir, I have one question to be asked. Sir, according to you, what are the impact on uh, humankind of on humankind of climate resilient activities?
Okay. Should I provide answers to each question, or I will
So, in
react to all questions?
so one by one you can take as per time. We would be continuing with the same.
Okay. Okay. Development resilience faced to climate risks is now imperative. It is like an urgent uh, trajectory that should be developed by humanity. And the resilience of humanity is not disconnected from the resilience of ecosystems. Now we are speaking about the resilience of social ecological systems. That means the decision making processes at all scales shouldn't focus only on humans and uh, marginalize, for instance, ecosystems, and focusing on the resilience of social ecological systems can be a very uh, uh, efficient way in facing climate change risks. So the impacts, for instance, on humans or social systems of climate resilience are numerous. For instance, uh, climate resilience can provide humanity with the needed human security to survive, because we are witnessing in many parts of the world in Africa, Asia, and Latin America that climate change impacts are undermining human security, access to food, access to health, access to water, economic and livelihood security, etc. So, climate resilience should be oriented toward fostering the human security first, because in many parts of the global south, and now we are witnessing also the impact of climate change on the global north, uh, should give priority to human security, not just to economic development or growth, because uh, in many countries that are economically developed can be also uh, uh, countries with human insecurity. So, any climate resilience scenario should be oriented first to human security, given the co-benefits for for humans. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, one more question I would like to ask you.
Yes.
Sir, whether development pace needs to be restricted to revive our environment and provide justice to humankind, or the slow, gradual steps are enough?
Um, yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. Uh, yeah, actually, scholars around the world are addressing these issues in different ways. There are many scientists that are calling for instance, deglobalization and degrowth. That means for them, economic growth or economic development is the main factor behind the environmental and climate changes, and also environmental and climate crisis. But in my opinion, limiting development to face climate and environmental crisis is like a lack of innovation. That means the the humanity is lacking the capacity to innovate, because there are many cases where we can develop ourselves. That means development as a whole, while also uh, protecting the environment, protecting the scarce natural resources, protecting the carrying capacity of ecosystems, and this is what we call sustainability. I am working with many scholars from India, especially with when it comes to climate smart agriculture or climate smart farming systems. And there are many empirical evidence that show possibility to produce food while being uh, ecologically and climate smart. And this kind of innovative approaches are now experienced in many parts of the world with very tangible and positive outcomes. So the problem is the scaling up of these successful experiences that work in some part of the world, but still not embraced by other part of the world. Because in this part of the world, where these innovative approaches are not embraced, you can find many dynamics or obstacles that limit the transformational change process. Like, for instance, the predominance of business as usual thinking, the predominance of market, the 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 control of decision-making processes by economic powers that prevents uh, the the adoption of these innovative solutions. And I can give an example that shows that we can do a lot to make development happening while co-benefiting the environment and also the climate system. Uh, During the COVID-19 crisis, and given the food insecurity problem around the world, there are many regions that started to produce food locally and to produce food according to some sustainable practices, sustainable and climate smart practices. And the populations that are making the choices are starting to disconnect from the market, to disconnect from multinational corporations, and to control their own productive and consumption systems locally. And this kind of shift, in my opinion, is substantial because humans can recover uh, their power over their lives, over their food, their health, and also their way of thinking. So, as conclusion of this for this question, development is not incompatible with environmental protection or uh, climate neutrality, but we should be courageous to adopt innovative approaches tested in many parts of the world with successful outcomes.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, can we take up one more?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay,
And
sir.
that will be the last question we'll be able to take, considering the
Yeah, my
time.
pleasure.
Sir, actually, we are collecting the questions from different people, and that has been collected by the members, and that is asked to you, sir. Thank you so much. Over to you, Hirana.
Yes. Sir, what is climate resilient development and how can we achieve it?
What is climate resilient development and how can we achieve it? Okay, so I think my whole presentation has covered this issue. Um, Climate resilient development is a development which is first less impactful of climate system and also a development which is resilient to climate risks in both ways. So to achieve this kind of development, we need first to reduce the carbon print of social economic activities of the humanity. So this is the first foundation to reduce the carbon print and also to reduce the negative externalities of development, like for instance pollution, overexploitation of scarce natural resources, disrupting the ecological balance, and uh, affecting or uh, reaching the what we call now the planetary boundaries. So development which is uh, neutral in terms of uh, carbon and environmental prints or externalities can be resilient over time because it is a continuous development. And to understand this, I can give example of some unsustainable and non-resilient development. Let's take the the example of modern and intensive and market-oriented agriculture, which is a kind of development in the agriculture sector. So this kind of agriculture is is not resilient anymore. First, because it is over relying on scarce natural resources like water and land. It is over relying on chemical inputs that is polluting, for instance, water, land, and causing the loss of biodiversity and also deforestation. And this kind of agriculture is oriented to meet the external needs instead of the needs of local populations. So it is not a human security oriented agriculture, but an agriculture to meet the needs of the international markets. And in most cases, we are using agriculture now to produce some kinds of energy in detriment of food security and sustainability in many parts of the world. So, if we want to make agriculture sustainable and climate resilient as a form of development, we need to combat all the negative impacts of the conventional agriculture. That means we have to develop an agriculture which is not over exploiting natural resources, which is not meeting only foreign needs instead of the food security of local populations, an agriculture that is rewarding the local farmers instead of the brokers or international markets operators, and also an agriculture that is capable of limiting global or limiting carbon emissions and also uh, uh, resisting the drought, resisting many climate change impacts, and can go on producing food for the populations, especially on the local level. So I respond to this question by giving the example of agriculture, uh, which is common to many developing countries, including India, which is one of the key uh, uh, agricultural producers around the world. And as I mentioned before, I am working with many scientists in India to produce this kind of agriculture in the future, oriented toward climate resilience, sustainability, and also an agriculture that meets the needs of local people instead only of markets. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for answering the queries of the audience.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir, for such an informative session and answering all the question and answers so patiently and thoughtfully. Thank you very much, sir. Now, I would
My
like
pleasure.
to request Ms. Hiral Shukla, Assistant Professor at Faculty of Law, GLS University, to officially propose a vote of thanks, sir.
Thank you so much, Riddhita ma'am. A very good afternoon to respected Dr. Mohammed Behnassi sir, Payal ma'am, and to one and all viewing the plenary session 4 titled Climate Resilient Pathways, Adaptation, Mitigation and Sustainable Development at the virtual International Conference on Climate Change Governance and Law. It is indeed a privilege for me to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the esteemed speaker of the session, Dr. Mohammed Behnassi, Professor of International Law and Politics of Environment and Human Security in Zohr University of Agadir, Morocco, on behalf of Faculty of Law, GLS University. Sir, I thank you for sparing your valuable time and delivering such an enriching session on the said subject. Climate change has forced the humanity at large to act collectively to preserve the environment and protect it from further damage. Sir, the way you conceptualized and expressed your valuable insight on the said topic is very pertinent in today's time. And thank you so much, sir, for also answering the queries of our august audience at the international conference. Thank you so much, sir, for being a part of the international conference and addressing the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so
It
much,
was my
sir.
pleasure.
Um,
Thank you so much. And I
with
send my
this,
greetings to.
So we will look forward to
thank you
have
so
more
much.
sessions with you. We are ending our broadcast over here. Thank you so much once